and welcome to another episode of What Happened, a show that answers the question, when's the What Happened on ClayFighters? Right now, I guess? I'm gonna be honest here, folks, I have no idea why there's been such a huge surge in requests to cover this 90s as hell parody fighter franchise. It's like asking me to cover the Scary Movie series, which I'm not gonna do. But I digress. Under our crazy big top today, you'll experience chills, spills, blockbuster exclusives, announcements, anti-announcements, and of course, cancellations. So, for all of you in attendance and to the millions watching around the world,
let's get ready to crumble!
To tell the wacky story of ClayFighter, you gotta start with the games that inspired it. Street Fighter II blew up the fighting genre, which was quickly exploding into something like a phenomenon, and that then led to Mortal Kombat. It took that same one-on-one concept and made it ever so darker, more realistic, and employed a unique visual style. I mean, to be fair, digitization really started with Pit Fighter, but who cares about Pit Fighter? Visual Concepts, known for several platformers and licensed fare under Interplay, began to investigate stop-motion animation as an eye-catching look suitable for video games, and soon teamed up with Danger Productions, who had experience with stop-motion to hash out the logistics. What spawned was two separate projects, the first being Claymates, a platformer, and then ClayFighter, which was a fighter. They felt that the genre, which focused on two large sprites, would work well with the expressive cartoon-esque quality of the medium. Interplay, wanting a piece of that delectable fighting game cream pie, were more than impressed with the early work and tests produced by the studios, and greenlit both titles. Visual Concepts would handle the programming and design, while Danger Productions would be in charge of slowly photographing every single frame. ClayFighter was made in about a year, with the instruction booklet vaguely mentioning that a clay meteor slammed into an amusement park, giving the horrible curse of life to a piece of taffy, an evil snowman, a clown, a Viking opera singer, a strongman, a scarecrow, a random blob, and finally, and most not dated at all, an Elvis impersonator.
Thank you very much.
Now, of course, due to the time and complexity of stop motion, the game's mechanics were kept fairly simple, as at the end of the day, the focus was on humor and silly characters, and not combos or frame traps. However, it was the game's marketing campaign that seemed to capture many imaginations, because it was 90s as fuck. Bad Mr. Frosty was shown having freshly murdered Chun-Li. They would also regularly spoof the Mortal Kombat Dragon logo, and even poor old world heroes got dunked on. I mean, like, why? Why you gotta bully my boy Mudman? Around this time, Interplay were reaching the height of their relevancy, having published most of Blizzard's early 16-bit classics, which fueled them to spend serious capital on a pretty penetrative marketing campaign, and it very much worked. ClayFighter came out just at the right time, with its mix of parody and potty humor, and saw the SNES version selling enough to warrant further Claysploitation. ClayFighter Tournament Edition, obviously a jab at Street Fighter II's revisions, unfortunately offered way less content than what it was referencing. It offered tournament mode that nobody ever used, new backgrounds, but stopped short of including a single new Clay batant. It was maybe for this reason that the original Super Nintendo version was never officially sold in stores, and was instead a Blockbuster exclusive. This might have been one of the earliest examples of, yeah, we don't think this game will sell well enough to warrant us selling it, so instead, put it on Blockbuster's tab. I'm not sure if Blockbuster exclusives were ever truly successful, so I'm just gonna assume that they weren't. Following that, a Genesis port then splattered onto Sega's machine with a pretty significant downgrade in terms of visuals and sound, as was tradition. Regardless, sales were still healthy enough for Interplay to push forward with a sequel, but even though Visual Concepts and Danger Productions worked well together, cracks began to form in the Clay mold. Interplay Productions took over the reins on ClayFighter 2 Judgement Clay, moving it from VC and Danger to be more of an in-house project. Fortunately, several key staff members at Visual Concepts hopped over to Interplay during this transition, but Danger Productions, for whatever reason, were cut out altogether, and another unnamed company supposedly specializing in stop motion was hired instead. What did the remainder of Visual Concepts move on to? Well, that would be a little game called Weapon Lord! Weapon Lord! Anyway, in a late 90s interview with IGN, ClayFighter alum Jeremy Airy revealed that the engine we used for ClayFighter 1 was very primitive. We scrapped that tool and went into production on ClayFighter 2 developing new processing tools, scripting, etc. In less than 6 months, we were able to complete that game, start to finish. Well, needless to say, the tools did not have time to go through the ringer and get the little tweaks that they needed. Another bad thing about Clay 2 was the quality of the actual clay work that was done. I won't say who did the work on Clay 2, but let's just say it was horrendous. Total crap. So, Interplay Productions had to redo everything themselves, which is why the sequel looks so different, losing that darker, almost Tim Burton-like style and taking on a more cartoonish Saturday morning-like look. Also, with only 6 months to develop it, Clay 2 didn't really have anything fresh. No new mechanics, gameplay tweaks, or additional modes. In fact, the only technically new things were alternate, eviler versions of the main cast. Even with these minor changes, the overall fighter count remained the same, a solid 8, swapping out older, less popular characters with new ones like Hoppy, Kangoo, Nanaman, Octohead, and Goo Goo. So yeah, it's pretty clear that Judgement Clay was rushed out the door to make a deadline, as Interplay wasn't known for their strong business acumen, which we haven't even scratched the surface of yet. Clay 2 released in the late 16-bit era, in the fourth quarter of 1995 if you want to be specific, and by then, the fighting game genre had gotten more complex, and hell, was even embracing the fad known as 3D, so Judgement Clay's lack of innovation, small roster, and reused jokes and humor didn't quite hit the funny bone the same way that its predecessor did. Jeremy and his team knew they needed to shake things up, especially with next-gen machines starting to come out. So they decided to plan their next game for a next-gen machine that never wound up coming out. First announced as ClayFighter 3 Showdown on Claymodo Island, the first order of business was to reconnect with Danger Productions so they could provide the claymation once again, as the company had really upped their game on the Saturday morning institution Bump in the Night.
You know, I heard if you swallow gum, it stays in your stomach for 7 years before it gets digested. Amazing, huh?
Is that true?
As I cleverly foreshadowed, ClayFighter 3 was planned for 3DO's ill-fated and never released M2 console, and as a launch game no less, but those plans obviously didn't pan out. A few months before the M2 was officially cancelled, Clay 3 was moved on to the N64 and PlayStation and redubbed as ClayFighter Extreme. When the team sat down and looked hard at the architectures of both machines though, they found neither was 100% suited for what they had in mind. The N64 had middling sound capabilities and little storage space, while the PlayStation would struggle with general loading and rendering 3D arenas that could change on the fly. The team eventually decided to focus on the N64, with a smaller group plugging away at the PlayStation version. By the time 1997 rolled around, that smaller team was lagging behind, and as progress on the N64 version pushed ahead, it was also decided via a stroke of genius to lampoon Nintendo's 64 branding with ClayFighter 63 1/3. Mwah! Of course, this left the PlayStation version without a dumb subtitle, so it just simply kept the Extreme name, but Unfortunately, the only extreme thing here were the measures taken by Interplay to cut costs. Not long after this new rebranding, the publisher announced that the Sony version of ClayFighter would never see a release. In an old GameSpot article, Interplay's Lisa Fleury was quoted as saying, "The reason that Interplay decided not to develop it, ClayFighter Extreme, is because it was not on schedule to release simultaneously with the N64 version. Rather than have it perceived by PlayStation consumers as a late port, we decided to stop the project and focus on ensuring simultaneous releases for all our other cross-platform titles." So instead of making PlayStation owners feel like they were getting a port, they wanted to make PlayStation owners feel like they were getting jack shit. Unfortunately, with all these delays, rebrandings, cancellations, and these epic bullshots, oh man, being released to magazines, could these be the first example of bullshots? Cause that's not what the game wound up looking like at all. Yeah, or was I? When it finally launched in October, 63 1/3 looked very muddy/blurry, even by N64 standards, featured stiff animation with lots of missing frames, and just had a jarring, contrasting look between its 2D characters and 3D backgrounds, something that KI Gold pulled off much better. This, coupled with gameplay that felt slow, unresponsive, and unpolished, resulted in the troubled title garnering its fair share of critics right out of the gate. This was a bit of a shame, as the team did add as much as they could to freshen things up. A much expanded roster with a mix of new and returning characters, including neat cameos by Jim and Boogerman, more special moves, multiple super attacks, claytalities, an expanded combo system, and even KI-style ultra finishers. With the addition of 3D backgrounds, camera angles were used to great effect, and even let fights transition from one stage to another with breakthroughs. I suspect this might be the first time a fighter with 3D backgrounds implemented this feature, but let me know how wrong I am in the comments below. Voice acting and music also saw a huge bump in quality, featuring lots of well-known names like, I'm gonna botch his name so bad, Dan Castellaneta, Frank Welker, and Rob Paulson. And hey, even Michael Buffer showed up to do the one thing he's known for.
Let's get ready to crumble!
Despite all this though, ClayFighter was still seen by many publications as a joke that was no longer as funny or as entertaining, despite it having more depth than previous entries. The PlayStation cancellation also left a sour, goo-filled taste in many fans' mouths, especially since the reasoning for throwing out the PlayStation build to be, well, pretty damn baffling. Now, back then, Interplay had been quoted as saying that ClayFighter 63 1/3 sold over 1 million copies, but this has never been confirmed with hard data. And honestly, it sounds a little like a big lie, as the company was desperate to have a hit as the 90s wore on. In fact, the only confirmed sales numbers I can find for 63 1/3 was 60,000 copies sold by the end of 1997. With numbers like that, you can be forgiven when you rubbed your eyes in confusion when you saw ClayFighter Sculptors Cut on the shelf of your local Blockbuster. It basically packed back in a heap of content that had to be cut from the final game, including a number of characters like Lockjaw Pooch, the Zappa Yow Yow Boys, Lady Liberty, and High Five. There was, however, one final character who was shown during the development of the original game, but who couldn't even make this director's cut. I present to you, Hobo Cop.
I'm having trouble.
There's been multiple theories as to why the puke-tastic police officer was given the axe, ranging from the fear of litigation from Orion and Columbia Pictures over RoboCop, to Nintendo having a problem with his special moves, which involved alcohol use and exposing his hobo penis. We were so cruelly denied this. And honestly, Sculptor's Cut is not seen as much of an improvement. The deal with Blockbuster resulted in only 20,000 copies of Sculptors Cut hitting the market, thus it remains one of the most rare N64 games ever made, and often commands outrageous prices that's not even really worth. And honestly, that's where the ClayFighter series officially ends. Sorta. As the 2000s approach, Interplay fell upon hard times, baby. To avoid bankruptcy, they entered the stonk market and changed their name from Interplay Productions to Interplay Entertainment, which for some reason gave them a few extra years. Titus Interactive, yeah, that Titus.
Titus? What the fuck is that?
Purchased a majority share in the company, but when Titus went belly up a few years later after that, Interplay entered a state of undeath or anti-life, I don't know, but some type of black magic kept their heart a-pumpin'. During pretty much all of the 2000s, they would often announce games that would never actually release them.
I could have told you that, laddie.
The one that's relevant to us today is ClayFighter, Call of Putty. I get it. Strangely, this release was slated for WiiWare and DSiWare of all things, but when you consider the pretty incredible ports of MDK on WiiWare, which had a 40 meg limit, I guess it was possible? The game was slated to be a remixed version of previous material with new features and fighters, including content from Sculptors Cut, presumably Hobocop. After numerous delays, though, Interplay just stopped talking about it altogether and never even officially cancelled it. While it's not confirmed, the most likely reason is that the technical hurdles of getting the game under DSi and WiiWare's size limits proved to be insurmountable. Fortunately, we can end on some good news. In 2015, Interplay announced ClayFighter was getting a full remake, along with its sequels. The Clay was back, baby! There's gonna be over 20 characters, fatalities, combos, air dashing, reversals, and be running in glorious HD. And after several years of never showing a single screenshot or video, Interplay stopped talking about it altogether. Again. Their website, which at one point did contain the announcement, has since been deleted. If it did exist, you would see that a studio by the name of Drip Drop Games was the developer, and a quick search on them yields absolutely nothing. Right. Of all the games I've covered on this channel, I don't think I've ever seen two completely separate attempts to revive a franchise fail so spectacularly, and until I hear otherwise, the blame has to fall on Interplay's last 20 years of shady, vague announcements and cancellations. I did promise some good news though. If you consider yourself a Clay fanatic and want to relive those memories with a slightly newer coat of paint, I highly recommend checking out the fan hack Ultra ClayFighter Tournament Edition. It uses the first game as a base, adding new moves and UI, reduced lag, fixed bugs and exploits, and making the game as polished and as competitive as possible. They also have plans to meticulously retouch sprites and backgrounds to look better than ever, to create a bridge between the first two games and 63 1/3. Link in the description below. While Interplay kind of exists, Visual Concepts would go on, of course, to great success making WWE 2K20. Wow, okay, so the ClayFighter franchise on the whole seemed like it was always kneecapped by its own publisher, either by rushed sequels or botched releases that never really materialized. A sad story to be sure, as it's unlikely we're ever going to see an official brand new revival anytime soon. Wait, when did I say that before? It's up for debate if the Birdman will ever fly again on video game consoles, but probably not. Okay, yeah, so maybe I just said the magic words, and bad Mr. Frosty is gonna be snowballing into our faces any day now. I mean, weirder shit has happened. If you're aware of any other fumbled follies into the video game or movie industries, let me know in the comments below, on my Twitter, or stretch or splorch over to the Flophouse VIP Patreon and become a big boss to nominate what you'd like to see in the future. See you next time, and thanks for watching.